Aloha. Welcome to the first Mac OS Stealer talk for today. My name is Sue. I'm a security researcher in the TAC eCrime team at CrowdStrike, where I look at some botnet families and Mac stealers.
Wonderful. Aloha and mahalo for being here with us today, everybody. We're so thrilled to talk about macOS stealers with y'all. My name is Maddie Stewart. I'm an intelligence analyst with CrowdStrike Intelligence's Global Threat Analysis Cell, and I work on the eCrime team specifically on enabling commodity-type malware.
So topics we're covering today, we're going to look at the stealers' operations, a bit about their campaigns and delivery, and in the technical end, we'll compare the popular and privately developed stealers by doing a deep dive on Cuckoo's C2 comms. Also worth noting that most of our research is based off Intel up until October of this year, unless we specify something more recent. And of course, now next, Maddie will give us a little introduction of how this trend in Mac stealers started.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sue. So you're probably wondering, why do we care so much about macOS info stealers? The advent of this type of info stealer greatly expands profit opportunities for opportunistic criminal actors by allowing them to target more victims. And I'm not saying that Windows wasn't a bad place to start, but Windows devices only comprise about 70% of devices worldwide, and the advent and introduction of these macOS info stealers begins to close the gap on that remaining 30% of devices. And so I don't want to steal too much of what's coming up in the presentation, but we will talk a little bit more later in this talk about how, what we would expect to see for these opportunistic criminal actors and what campaigns would look like using these maybe two different payloads designed for different operating systems. So this is a little price breakdown, of the popular macOS stealers and popular Windows stealers. You'll see on the macOS side, we've got stealers that are available for a monthly rental ranging anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000 US per month per license. And then on the Windows side, the price is anywhere from $100 to $800 US for any monthly rental range between 1 month and up to 6 months. And so you're looking at this thinking it's a little easier to get into the eCrime enabling and commodity malware space if you're renting a Windows stealer versus a Mac stealer. And why is this the case? It's classic economics 101. If there's little supply and high demand for these tools, these operators are able to charge more prices for them. Whereas on the Windows side, there's a lot of supply, the same kind of demand, and so these operators can't charge the same prices here.
Oh, this is me.
Okay.
Yes, so before we go ahead and talk about campaigns and delivery, a little, so we get our bearings straight and just a little technical overview, a high-level overview of what a Mac stealer is. So most Mac stealers, they're delivered in an installer as a DMG file. Of course, the slides are a bit off, but at the bottom is a reference, so you'll get a link to that reference when we share the slides. But yeah, so the more common thing is like when the installers run, they provide instructions to the user on how they are meant to execute the application. So the classic one you see is the one on top, where the user is asked to right-click on the icon and select Open. But this is really for bypassing Gatekeeper. It's not for running the application. It's just to bypass it. And now more recent ones, because that trick doesn't work on the newer Mac version, Sequoia. So more recent campaigns, you will see a different set of instructions, which is they ask the user to drag a file into a terminal. And here you see it's like a text file. I mean, okay, but that's a bash script. And so long story short, the bash script removes the quarantine file attributes from the file, so another way to get around Gatekeeper. Now, while the stealer is running, they will prompt the user for their password. Each stealer has their own style on what the message prompt is, so also sometimes based on the lure, like Google Chrome wants to exit your settings. Now, once the stealer gets that password, it's the Pandora's box from there. They start harvesting things like the OS X keychain, data from applications like browsers, crypto wallets, other applications like Telegram, Discord, and such. So, based off this high level, it why oftentimes at the very beginning of this trend, a lot of times in the industry, we would often confuse the stealers for this one particular variant that's called AMOS, the Atomic macOS stealer. Which brings us to our next topic, which is on the operations and getting to the bottom of it and figuring whether it is all just AMOS. Well, kind of. So AMOS started the Mac stealer trend in 2023. It's operated by the moniker Pinger, who we track as the adversary cookie spider at CrowdStrike. Pinger has been active since 2018, is known for starting the Cookie.pro forum, and they took over the AMOS project in April of 2023. Another moniker part of AMOS is Panda X, who handles support. At some point, they started selling their own stealer, but really it was an exact copy of AMOS. Finally, another likely member of AMOS was Rodrigo 4. Rodrigo 4 is the operator of a stealer we track as DoShell. So DoShell, that project started in September 2023, a few months after AMOS. So Rodrigo 4, a bit about him, he's known for constantly rebranding their project names. He first started calling it Private macOS Stealer, but there was nothing private about it. Then he switched it to Rodrigo's, finally started calling it Poseidon. Some of you folks may be familiar with that name. And eventually in July of this year, he sold the project and claimed to have left the Mac stealer landscape despite still offering his opinions on forums. Yeah, so now this landscape has seen a lot more monikers come and go. A few that are worth mentioning were previously themselves customers of AMOS. So first up we have is the Cthulhu team, comprising of the monikers B Cthulhu and CryptoLove. And they are known for running non-fungible token NFT scams, and they started their own aptly named stealer called Cthulhu. More recent moniker to enter this landscape is Caller Sane, who started Banshee Stealer in August of this year.
Wonderful. So we'll just do a little timeline of what we've seen here. You know, AMOS got its start, and it was very popular, and obviously the operator of AMOS, Cookie Spider and Pinger, was making quite a lot of money from this, very successful. And so we, like Sue said, we've seen a lot of monikers enter and exit the landscape because these actors want a bit of that pie and want to be able to make some money as well. So in March of 2023, we saw AMOS first being spoken about, and the first campaigns followed in April of 2023. Now, something here I want to call back to something Sue spoke about with some of the gatekeeper bypasses. Pinger remains active when developing this stealer, and in September, I think only 2 weeks after the latest Sequoia update, the adversary updated AMOS to make sure it could still successfully infect victims.
Sorry, I just want to point out that you do not see the timeline at the bottom. I don't know why slides, but we'll make sure to say their date.
I didn't even see that, so don't worry, you'll see all this, I promise. And then in June, we had we saw some forum discussion. Oh, can you guys hear me now? Okay, fabulous. We saw some forum discussion from an actor called CodeHex about their own macOS stealer called Shadow Vault. We didn't really see this one pick up. However, CodeHex remained very active in the community, you know, kind of giving feedback and criticism on other macOS stealers. Now, this is an interesting one, Real Stealer. This is a stealer that's predominantly delivered via malvertising with video game-related lures. And of course, with CrowdStrike, the kind of telemetry we have access to is largely corporate data based on the kind of services our company provides. But we did have a couple cases in August of Real Stealer, but we are unable to attribute this to a known actor, and we believe it's privately owned and operated as of this presentation. In September, we saw Rodrigo 4 start talking about what was known then as Private macOS Stealer, that for the sake of not calling it that, because it's a tough name to track and keep, you know, all your notes in check, we renamed it DoShell Stealer for our tracking purposes. Again, DoShell remained a very popular stealer throughout its time in the eCrime marketplace and was one of the big competitors to AMOS, and we saw a lot of AMOS and DoShell campaigns throughout 2024 when we, you know, DoShell was first spoken about in September, but we saw campaigns really kick off in January of this year. And of course, Rodrigo announced their retirement from the eCrime ecosystem in July of this year. However, the actor, you know, still, while they sold the project, they are still very active in leaving feedback, opinions, and even sometimes an advice giver in the macOS development space. Our next one here is Cthulhu Stealer, operated by the Cthulhu team that Sue spoke about. They're a former customer of AMOS, again, trying to get a bit of that money that these operators make by renting these malwares. And we didn't really see this kick off, even though they did have a really nice pricing deal for new customers, $500 for your first month of rental, which is considerably lower than a lot of the rates that we spoke about earlier. In May of this year, we first observed Cuckoo Stealer, which is largely delivered via malvertising, and this is a very interesting one that we'll speak a little bit more about. It's not just an info stealer, it has rat-like capabilities and can also execute C2 commands, so going beyond the breadth of what a typical info stealer capabilities can include. And then lastly, I'll just call that in August, we saw Banshee Stealer operated by Colosane first advertised, and we believe that this macOS stealer is largely delivered by malvertising. And while we scoped the content of this talk to the end of October, we have noticed throughout November that this actor has expressed a desire to also sell the project, and there's been a whole series of dramatic leaks and people criticizing him for how much they're selling the project for. I'll now just chat a little bit about some of the campaigns that we've seen here at CrowdStrike Intelligence and go over some of those delivery methods as well. So in the first slide, when we talked about why we think macOS stealers are so important, it really expands those profit opportunities by enabling these actors to target more systems and make more money that way. So this is a timeline of some of the campaigns. Okay, now I'm seeing that we also don't have the dates here, but it goes from 2023 through July of this year. And so we've seen a lot of SEO poisoning and malvertising predominantly for macOS stealers, but we've seen other delivery methods such as malicious VS Code extensions, phishing, as well as malicious browser update. On the AMOS side, on the macOS stealer side, we've largely seen AMOS and Do Shell Stealer as the payload of choice for these campaigns. And then on the Windows side of the house, we have info stealers such as Luma, SteelC, and Radamanthus, and loaders like Eugen Loader and Hijack Loader, as well as some other types of Windows malware. But these campaigns, we theorize, are able to demonstrate that these opportunistic criminal actors are leveraging these more expanded profit opportunities, and this is kind of how we would expect those to look. Next up, this was an interesting campaign involving the fake play-to-earn games as a method of delivering macOS stealers to a victim. And in this campaign, the threat actor tried to make their fake game look a little bit more legit by creating social media profiles on X to maybe entice those victims to download those games. Another interesting campaign involved fake job advertisements. This involved a threat actor posting on job boards and in Telegram channels to advertise for a job listing. In this case, it was for a beta tester for a new game. And this was an interesting one because it required a little bit of social engineering and interaction on the threat actor's behalf with the potential victim. And in this case, the victim, believed that they were going to download this game to test for the job, and instead, they downloaded AMOS. Not exactly as fun. And I would be remiss if I didn't speak a little bit about malvertising and SEO poisoning, because these are a very popular delivery mechanism that we see here at CrowdStrike. And so throughout the year and a half or so that we've been tracking macOS stealers, we've been able to group these campaigns into different campaign themes. The first one would be applications used by IT professionals and corporate employees, and this includes malware such as Notion, not malware, I'm losing my mind. This includes applications like Notion, Calendly, and Homebrew. The second grouping would be cryptocurrency and financial applications like TradingView and cryptocurrency wallets such as Phantom and Rabby. And then the last one, we don't see as much of this as kind of more of our own independent research. It involves a lot of video game related lures. And so in this one, keeping up with the typo squatting that we see a lot in malvertising, that's not to say that we can't see that same element used in different campaigns. This one involved the upload of malicious VS Code extensions into the Visual Studio Marketplace. And I'll just say, I had to write this on my notes, the left is the typo squatted on the screen, and the right is the legitimate file name. And in this campaign, AMOS was delivered to macOS users, and SteelC was delivered to Windows. And this is an example of one of those campaigns that demonstrates threat actors really taking advantage of those expanded target opportunities to make more money. One last campaign I want to highlight includes a phishing campaign from July of 2024. This involved a threat actor impersonating legitimate staff to engage with employees to get their information. You know, they provided actual employee and company-related info to appear more legit to these potential victims they had. So they were able to get a couple sets of credentials and use that for initial access. And then once they were inside the victim's system, they were able to download a pen testing tool that they then they were able to download and modify the victim's customer's modem settings to redirect to a malicious DNS resolver. These malicious DNS resolvers then kind of directed potential site visitors to a malicious site that encouraged them to download this tool that was supposed to aid with internet connectivity issues. And in this case, the macOS victims received a do shell stealer, and the Windows received Hidden Weaver and ParallelX Rat. I'll now pass it over to Sue to talk a bit more about Cuckoo Stealer.
Yes, so earlier in the talk, I gave a little high-level overview about what a Mac stealer is. And so, from that alone, you may ask, are all stealers just built in the same way? Well, they do have some differences. I mean, they're programmed with different languages. Some may have a unique technique or two. But what we find in our analysis is that they all differ in how they communicate back to the C2. And this is more so when you compare it against a stealer that's developed privately. So in our case, we're going to look at specifically Cuckoo stealers' C2 communication. And as Maddie mentioned, Cuckoo does more than just harvesting data. They also have backdoor capabilities. So Cuckoo uses three different I'll explain what the bottom one is. Three different C2 protocols to communicate with the server. They are the stealer, backdoor, and the file operations component. I think that was the only text at the bottom. So first off, we're going to touch on the stealer protocol. So here's a sequence diagram on what that is. The first request that's highlighted, the stealer will send a request to the server with this command getCFG, and it asks for a configuration file from the C2. That config tells the stealer what browser extensions it needs to harvest, and it's in particular looking for crypto wallets or TOTP-related files. So now, unlike the popular stealers, the names we mentioned previously, those stealers come embedded with a large list of extensions. But Cuckoo's devs prefer to filter this list and provide a more, narrow option for their customers. Customers can choose. It's unclear why they do this. But apart from this difference, like most stealers, they will harvest things like the keychain, application data, and such. Now, the remaining two requests is where the stealer will exfiltrate the data. You may ask, why are they splitting the request in two? Why not just send the data in one shot? Well, the data that's sent in the second request comes from system-protected files. So now, if the stealer cannot access that data, it makes sure that at least part of the information can get back sent to the C2. But now it does try to access the system-protected directories. So what it does is it'll first try to navigate to the desktop folder. Now, if it cannot, it will run this tccutil command and navigate to desktop again. So at that point, the stealer will be prompted with this message which will ask, and you may be familiar with this, do you want to allow this application to access desktop? Now, once they give that permission, the stealer will mute the machine's volume, harvest the data, and then reset the volume back. The volume is likely adjusted because resetting events with tccutil may likely raise a lot of notifications in the background, and this is not to raise the user's suspicions. So a quick bit on the encryption scheme in that protocol, because those messages are not sent in plain text. Cuckoo uses elliptic curve cryptography. They will first create a secret file reading 32 bytes from devu random, and then they use the server's public key that's embedded in its binary to derive a shared key. That key is used to XOR with the data that's compressed with gzip. Finally, what's sent to the C2 is the stealer's public key, concatenated with the letter K, and followed by the encrypted data. So far, at least, on the stealer side of things, because Cuckoo does more than stealing, as compared with the popular ones, or the ones that are that are sold publicly. So something like stealer configuration, you do not see them in, publicly built stealers, and this makes sense. Now, stealers sold on public forums, they advertise their features, and they tend to compete with each other, these operators, and they claim that they can offer similar features or capabilities. So something like Cuckoo, which is likely operated privately in a closed group, the public operators do not have access to that information and may not even need or realize the need for, building such a capability like a configuration. TCC bypass, Banshee Stealer actually executes the same set of commands like Cuckoo. So, this goes to show that, despite Cuckoo looking all fancy and stuff, they are not necessarily proficient, but they both, like Banshee devs, are aware of some limitations with the the macOS for their stealer, in this case, they both have somehow landed upon the same solution, likely taken off some forum. Asymmetric encryption, none whatsoever in the public stealers. Banshee Stealer does use symmetric encryption. They XOR the encrypted data, but it's kind of a moot point because the key is sent with the data over the network. So I don't see the point with that. But yeah, so with no encryption, it makes it a lot more easier to detect that traffic in the network, and it also shows that the operators they're not really concerned with maintaining the integrity of the information that they're stolen. So for all we know, that you could easily manipulate that data. So anyways, in terms of complexity and efficiency, Cuckoo is well ahead of the curve here. Now, we'll cover the remaining protocols just because they are really interesting. Okay, I was afraid the picture might get short, but I'll explain it. So here is a sequence diagram of the backdoor protocol. Here the stealer will use a different public key for this server, and you'll also notice the endpoint's different. It's static.php. So the few highlighted requests there is just for setting up the communication. So for example, in the first command 101 is where they do the key exchange, because it's a new secret, it's a different server key, so the shared key is also different. And then registers the victim with some basic information with command 111. 102 is where it'll continuously beacon to the C2 asking for commands. So at the bottom, now when the server responds with the command init, so you don't see this, it will just redo a second key exchange and continue beaconing again, so just creates a new secret from there. Now with this protocol, the operator can execute shell commands, they can reboot the machine, uninstall the stealer. Oh, sorry, I kind of went fast. With command 115, they can restart the stealer protocol and optionally exfiltrate it to a different C2 that's provided. The C2's address is provided via this command. So command 113, Cuckoo will create a new thread, and from there, create a new socket connection to a different IP and port that's also provided via this command, and the operator can terminate this connection. So yes, I don't know if it's quite visible there, but this very connection is the file operations protocol, which is our next sequence diagram. So it's a socket connection, it's more like TCP packets at this point. Here's an example of what that data is, but because of time, I won't have enough time to go over all the details of it, but I do want to mention two values in this packet that are hard-coded in every message. So first value is this magic D word, likely suggesting the start of this custom protocol, and then at offset 30 is this hard-coded string, like 16 bytes of A. Not clear what that means, but it's been quite constant across samples. So yeah, the operator uses this protocol to list files in a user's directory, upload files back to the C2, move files across the user's machine, delete files from it. So clearly a lot of fancy stuff going on here. So before we end, I do want to mention that there's more to the stealer. Now, the developer of Cuckoo is highly likely also a developer of this Windows stealer that we track as TM stealer. And we'll tell you why. So both these stealers were observed using the same server public keys for both the stealer and the backdoor protocol. And also the protocol, the messaging, the style was the same. So, which means okay, the attacker on the server side likely has access to that same private key. You cannot duplicate this. So, yes, it's likely the same person. But here's an interesting bit. TM Stealer was first observed in November 2022, whereas Cuckoo came more into scenes in April of this year. So this is something quite what distinguishes with the publicly owned stealers that we've talked about, is you're more likely to see such complex private stealers emerge from groups that are already well established in the eCrime stealer landscape and who likely operate in a closed group and already have a dedicated group of customers. So with that, we'd like to conclude our talk with some few key points. So yes, talking about the landscape so far, you just got a little glimpse of it, but it's very competitive. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of arbitration, operators come and go. So far, for all we know, Pinger, that's the operator of AMOS, is still pretty active, but there's likely more.
Absolutely, and we expect that this kind of revolving door and competitive landscape will continue as we track macOS stealers in the coming year. I'll also note, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that malvertising plays a big role in enabling successful infections for operators of macOS stealers and their customers. And then, I do a lot of work in the enabling commodity malware space at CrowdStrike, like I mentioned earlier. And so one thing that we've noticed from tracking macOS stealers is that a lot of the trends that we're seeing on the macOS side when it comes to delivery, we're also seeing on the Windows side. And, that kind of gets us thinking that in the next, as this area of the eCrime ecosystem continues to grow, it's that we'll see tools outside of macOS. Do you want to do that? Sorry, the mouthfeel was really odd, so let me try that again. We think that macOS stealers are likely to be just the beginning of what macOS malware will look like in the commodity eCrime space. That's not to say that we're not seeing anything like that now, but we've got loaders, downloaders, and rats in the Windows ecosystem. And like Sue said, Cuckoo stealer is not just an info stealer, it's got these rat-like capabilities as well. So we're already kind of starting to see the evolution beyond just a typical info stealer. And that's all we've got for y'all today. Thank you so much for your attention, and come find us to chat about it a little more.